Hi, this is Jason from Effective Dashboards, helping maintenance and reliability professionals get the most out of Power BI. So welcome back to another video. In this video, it's section 3 of my short course on how to create a maintenance balanced scorecard using the Power KPI Matrix custom visual. Okay, so in sections 1 and 2, I looked at what a balanced scorecard is and how it relates to maintenance, and also went through some of the KPIs that I think would make good KPIs to be included in a balanced scorecard. We then went on to spend some time importing and transforming the data from various different data sources into the report so that it was shaped up and formatted just how we need it to be to support building this KPI matrix here using the Power KPI Matrix. So that's in section 2. So if you want to check those out, they're in another video, and I'll leave a link below for you can go and have a look at that. Otherwise, let's crack on and let's start building the matrix using the Power KPI Matrix. Okay, so this is what we're going to end up with. We're going to end up with each of the different aspects. These are like categories. The KPIs related to each one of those. We're going to end up with a column here that there's a percentage difference between a desired value, a target value, and the actual performance. So that's the current value. We've got this threshold, which is actually the target. And then we're also going to add the absolute difference. Okay, so we've got a percentage difference here, but sometimes it is also interesting just to articulate what the absolute difference is rather than seeing it as a percentage. And then we're going to build this trend line here. Okay, so that's what we're going to cover in this video. Okay, so the first thing you need to do before we start to create the balance scorecard, the maintenance balance scorecard, is import this Power KPI Matrix visualization. So it's not part of the standard visualizations that come out the box with Power BI Desktop. So all you do is go to Get More Visuals, and then you just follow this link here, Get More Visuals, and just have a search in there for the Power KPI Matrix and just get it, and it'll download here automatically. So let's click on this. We're going to open it up, give ourselves a bit of space here. And we can see that there's quite a number of different fields here, and there's lots and lots of configuration options. So there's lots of fields here that you can add in. We're just going to go through each one, or all of the relevant ones, and just talk about them and just populate them as we go. So the first thing we see here is a date. So we need a date. So most of the information that we're going to take in is going to be either in this KPI definitions or this scorecard table. Okay, both of these scorecard tables. So just as a means of recap, what we've done in the previous video is we have created tables for each of the different data sources that we're going to be pulling the maintenance KPI data from. Okay, so this is all of the data here. Now those tables are then, or the information in those tables is all appended into a single table here called Scorecard KPIs. Okay, so there's no relationship between these tables. They're there, each one has got a different set of transformations, a different set of different data sources, and we're using Power Query to pull them together and get them into that single format that is then appended into this table here, which is where all of the information is now stored. So I could really hide all of these actually, probably should, but for just now, I'm just going to leave them. Then I've created this KPI definitions table here, and there's a connection here on the KPI name between the definitions table and the actual values. Okay, so the values are stored here. The KPI definitions table, if I just have a quick look at that, again, it is covered in more detail in the previous video, but for just now, we can see it's got the KPI name, it's got an indication as to whether above the target is good or below the target is good. It's got some numbers here for sorting it, and it's got a mapping to this balance scorecard category. Okay, so these first four here belong to finance. This critical equipment percentage availability belongs to customer. These belong to internal processes. Okay, so that's where that information is stored. So let's go back into here, and we're going to add in a date. So the date is in here, and as soon as we add a date, some information starts to be displayed. And then we're going to look at the actual value. So the actual value is going to come from the value. Okay. And then we're going to look at the comparison value, which we've called the target, which is going to go in here. Now the KPI indicator index, these ones will come to in a second. But a bit further down, we've got the row-based metric name. Okay, so that's the name of the metric that we want to display in each of the different rows here. Now we're going to actually take that metric from the KPI definitions table. So we will add that in there. And we can see these are starting to be displayed here, which is great. Then we've got the category. So that is going to come from this balance scorecard category here. And then I add the category. There we go. Okay, so we can see it's built this hierarchy here. So customer, the category called customer has only got one KPI in it, which is critical equipment availability. Finance has got all of these. Internal processes have got all of those KPIs, etc. So that all seems to be working fine. If we go a little bit further down, this sort order. So because we've assigned a number to the categories and a number to the KPIs, we can use this sort order. I need to add in the KPI number and then the category. There we go. That should work now. Ah, perfect. Okay, so now we've got finances number 1, customer number 2, internal processes number 3, and HR, well, learning and growth is number 4. And then within each one of these, we've got these numbers, these sorted according to the actual KPI number that we assigned in the definitions table. So we can see here, finance is 1, customer is 2, internal processes is 3, and the learning is 4. And then within each one of these, we've just numbered them. So losses and maintenance cost per barrel, etc. Okay, so losses, maintenance cost per barrel. So that's all working nicely. Okay, so that is the first set of configuration. Next, we're going to talk about this KPI indicator. So we'll see here, as soon as we added in the value and the target, we automatically get this KPI status column added in. Okay, and what that is a calculation of a percentage difference between the actual current value, which is this actual value here, but the most recent one. Okay, it's a current one and it's got a date here. So most of these are the 25th of May. This one here, because this was monthly, it's taking the most recent month, which was May, the start of May. And that's the value that's displayed in this current value column here. And then this KPI difference looks at this value here and compares it to the comparison, and it's a percentage difference essentially. So yep, that's fine, but what we can use is we can use this KPI indicator index and KPI indicator values to actually add some conditional formatting to this this value here to say, is it good or is it bad, and color it and add a symbol. So we'll go and we'll cover that next. Okay, so I'm just going to cover a little bit of, I've put a few slides together just to explain how this KPI indicator index works. So the KPI indicator index is a number that you need to add next to each one of your rows in your row-based KPI table. Okay, so we've got this table here, we've got a date, we've got a KPI name, we've got a value, we've got a target. So this indicator is another column that we need to add in, and we'll add it in a second. So the column should return a value from 1 to 5. I mean, you can make it return anything you want, but the default and the best approach really just to keep it as consistent as possible is to return a value from 1 to 5. You don't need to use all of these values, although you can actually assign different conditional formatting to each of 5 different values. So first of all, we need to go and calculate that. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a couple of approaches, but the first approach we're going to use is a simple approach where we're going to create this code here to create a calculated column. And then we're going to use a switch statement, and it's going to be switch true, so basically it'll select whichever one of these is true first. If the scorecard KPIs value is greater than or equal to the target, then we're going to return the value of 3. Okay, and we can see this one here has got a value of 3. If the scorecard KPI value is less than the scorecard KPI's target, so here's that 4th line there, is going to return a value of 1. Okay, so if it's bigger than the target, it's 3. If it's less than the target, it's going to be 1. So once we've got this KPI indicator index, we are then going to drop it into the field called KPI indicator index. And that is then going to be mapped in the setup, and we're going to go through these stages, but I just want to talk you through the sort of high level setup here. That value there is then going to be mapped into a value that is in the format pane under KPI Indicator. So if this value is a 3, the 3 is the value that's in here, and this is going to display this KPI as a, or this column here, the variance column, using a diamond as a symbol, and it's going to be red. Okay, and the diamond is going to be red, and the actual text is going to be red. Okay, now if it was a 1, it would display this value here in green, and it would have a circle beside it. You'll see that when we go in and look in Power BI. Okay, so this KPI indicator index, we calculated based on it being above or below the target, and then we set the conditional formatting that is related to that number in the actual formatting tab for the Power KPI Matrix visual. Okay, so let's go in and have a look at setting this up. Okay, so I'm back in here and I'm going to add in a new calculated column. And we're going to call this KPI indicator index. And we're going to call it simple because we're going to go and do another one as well. And I'm just going to go and copy the formula into here. Okay, so that is it now in here, and if I go into this table, we can see that under the scorecard KPIs, we've now got this KPI indicator index simple. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple of these. We've got this one here, which has got a value of 95, essentially, 95 point something something. The target value is 96, so this is 1. Okay, so if I click on here, we can see it's 1 because the value is less than the target. This one is 1, and its value is 3 is because this value here is bigger than or equal to the target. Okay, so let's go back into here now, and we're going to go and drop this into this KPI indicator index. And we can see that each one of these has been configured with either a green circle in green text on the variance, or a red triangle. Okay, and that is set up in the KPI indicator section here. Okay, now the options to set this up, you can set it up on a matrix for everything, or you can set these up on an individual KPI by KPI basis. Now, when we take this approach here, this is really, what we've done here is we've actually identified, or we've set the value to be 1 if it's above the target, and is it 1 if it's above the target? Hold on. Yeah, we've set this up to be 1 if it's below the target, and 3 if it's above or equal to the target. Okay. Now, some KPIs, it'll be desirable to have a value that's above the target. So for example, if we've got our critical equipment availability, we want it to be above the target. For some KPIs, it's desirable to have a value that's below the target. Okay, so what we will need to do with this approach is we will need to look at each KPI and understand, do we want it to be red if it's below or above the target? So losses due to equipment failures, we want it to be red if it's above the target, because it's not, we want to limit the losses, so that's fine. Maintenance cost per barrel, again, if it's above the target, we want it to be red. If it's below the target, which it is, we want it to be green, so that's okay. Cost of breakdown is fine, we want it to be below the target, it's above at the moment. Actual cost as well, we want it to be below. And now here's one here, so critical equipment availability. So at the moment it's 80%, its current value is 80. And it is, the KPI status is basically green, but it's below the target of 96%. So we want that to be red. So what we're going to have to do is go in and set up this KPI indicator for critical equipment availability, and we're going to have to set up, if the value is 1, we need this to be actually red. Okay, so we need that for this one here, we want the value of 1 to be this red, and we want it to be, oh, it doesn't like that at all, does it? Let's go back in again here. Red diamond. And if it's a 3, we want it to be a circle, the green circle. Okay, so now we can see the current value is 80. The variance is minus 16.67% below the target, which is supposed to be 96. Okay, so what we need to do is go through each one of the KPIs and format this pane here, depending on whether we want a 1 is above the target is good or below the target is good. Okay, and vice versa. So that is what we would do with the simple version. The next approach I'm going to show you is where we have that information automatically, or where we have the number, the KPI index number, automatically set to either the 1 or the 3, depending on whether above the target's good or below the target's good. So let's go on and have a look at how we do that. Okay, so let's look at the second approach. So the second approach is really to bake the logic that determines whether we want a KPI to be good or bad, or above or below the target to be good or bad, into the actual calculation of this KPI indicator index. Okay, so let me go, we're going to create a new calculated column. I'm going to paste this code in here. So this will need you to understand a little bit more about DAX, but it's pretty straightforward stuff once I talk you through it. So we're going to use some variables to begin with, and the variables are just to make it easier for this to read the information, or to read the code below it. So we're going to capture the KPI name as a variable, we're going to capture the target as a variable, and we're going to capture the actual value, the current value, as a variable, and we're going to call those KPI name, KPI target, and KPI value. We're then going to go and for this particular row, and remember each one of these, because it's a calculated column, it's got a row context. So each row is going to be, the context is already there for the row, so we don't need to go and find the min or the max or whatever. There is only one value of each one of these in the row. Then we have to go, and for this KPI, we've got to get the related definition of related value in the KPI definitions table for the threshold status. Okay, now let's go and look at that threshold status. So remember earlier on we've got a connection between the KPI definitions table and the scorecard KPIs table based on the name. So it's going to follow that connection using the name, the KPI name, and it's going to be able to pull back the status to say below is good for this one here, below is good for this one here, or above is good. Okay, so we're going to be able to identify, because we've already set it up in the actual KPIs definitions table, whether it's desirable to above the target, above the comparison value, or below the comparison value, okay, for this particular KPI, or for each particular KPI. So let's go back into this index here. So once we've got this value, we've got two switch statements here. We've actually got three, but we've got two switch statements, and they're going to basically be used to determine whether we're going to return a 1 or a 3, okay, for this particular KPI. So what it's going to say is, it's going to say if the value that we're going to want to use below here is KPI index above is good, then what we're going to do is return a 1 if the KPI value is greater than the target. Okay, so if it's desirable for the KPI to be above the target, then we're going to return a 1. Otherwise, we're going to return a 3. Now, I have actually included this code here, which will return a 2 if it's within 98%, and you can play with these percentages if you want, of the target. So if you ever wanted to have something that was like an amber, which is close to the target, then you can just take out these comments here and you can play with these. But I'm not going to use it, I'm just going to keep it simple. Above the target, or on the right side of the target is green, on the wrong side of the target, or the comparison value, is going to be red. Okay. Next, we're going to go and create just a copy of this code here. However, this one here, KPI index below is good. So for those KPIs where below the target is desirable, if the KPI value is below the target, then it's going to be 1. Okay, and remember, 1 is going to be formatted as being green with that green circle. Otherwise, it's going to be a 3. Okay, so the switch statement has got almost like an else at the end of it. So if it's not a 1, then it must be a 3 because we're only using two values here. But likewise, we've got this option here to use a 2 if you want to have a value that's slightly above the target, so 2% above the target, it can be amber. Okay. And then we use our result. We use a variable to in another switch statement. So if the value that's returned here, KPI threshold status, equals above is good, then we're going to use this logic to go and calculate whether it's a 1 or a 2 that's returned for the KPI index. If the KPI threshold status is below is good, so the value that's written beside each of the KPI names, if below is good, then we're going to use this value here, which is this logic here, to calculate whether 1 is returned or 3 is returned. Okay, so this is a bit more of a dynamic calculation of the KPI index value, and we don't need to change any of the configuration in the actual dashboard. So if we go back to this dashboard, go in here, go into the KPI indicator, we can leave, for all metrics, we can leave anything that's a 1 is going to be green. Okay, because we've calculated that 1 based on whether above or below the value is desirable, below the target value is desirable, and anything that is a 3 is going to be red. Okay, so this is the sort of second approach. So you don't need to make it, all the logic's baked into the actual calculation of the KPI index value. You don't need to change any of these setups here for each of the individual KPIs to take that into account. So it depends on how comfortable you are using some DAX just to build out that logic into the calculated column. If you're not comfortable using it, then you can actually go and just configure each of the different KPIs in and their conditional formatting using this value here and just selecting each KPI and setting 1 has been red or 1 has been green or whatever colours you use based on it being above or below the target value. So hopefully you understand what I'm getting at here. I'm going to go and use this KPI index here. Now I did revert this one back, so remember this one was basically above the target was green because we used that blanket for the simple one. Anything above the target was always going to be 1. Now if I go and replace this with this index value here, we'll see that this has now changed. Okay, so we want it to be below, we want it to be above the target, it's below the target, so it's red. Okay, let's choose another one. Preventive maintenance is 11%. The target is 100%, so it's well below the target. And here we can see that it's been formatted as red with a red diamond. Okay, so a little bit of a tricky concept to get your head around. Hopefully I've managed to kind of convey how you can set it up and the two options you've got, depending on how comfortable you are with DAX. But I prefer the second option because it's a lot cleaner. You don't need to mess about trying to configure the each KPI with a different set of conditional formatting values. Just set one conditional formatting value and you change the calculation of that number, whether it's a 1 or a 3, with some logic. Okay, so that is us set up the indicator value. Next we're going to set up the secondary indicator value. Okay, so next we're going to create a second comparison value. Okay, so there's an option here for second comparison value and second KPI indicator value. So we're going to keep it relatively straightforward here, and we're going to create a second comparison value, and I want that to be the difference, the absolute difference, rather than a percentage difference between these two values here. Okay, so I think it's useful to be able to help you kind of quantify the difference and carry out that, rather than having to carry out that calculation there that's 150%. I mean, it's good to see it as a percentage, but I would like to see the value of 470 because that's the absolute value between these two, the current value and the comparison value. And we're going to mess about with these columns and orders in a second, but I just want to get all of the kind of the columns in there first of all, and then we can look at the order that they're going to be in. So let's go and create a new calculated column. And I'm going to paste this in. It's going to be called difference from KPI value abs. Okay, so the absolute value. And I'm going to drop it into this secondary comparison value. So what's done is it's created a secondary comparison value here, which I want to see. So that's great. That's the absolute difference between these two here. So that's 0.51, this one's 34, this one's 470. But it's also created a secondary KPI status. So that's basically looking at the percentage difference between of this as a percentage of that, essentially. I think, I don't even know what the percentage is. It looks like it might even be that as a percentage of this comparison value here. However, I don't want to see that value there because this absolute value is just the same as this percentage here, but just a number rather than a percentage. So I'm going to get rid of this secondary KPI status here. So let's go in, and underneath the formatting tab, we've got this second KPI comparison value, which we want to leave in, but it's this indicator value that we're going to get rid of here. Okay, so we don't want to see that for this example here. So here we have it. We've got the category here. We've got the date. We've got the metric name. We've got the current value. We've got the difference from the comparison value, and we've got the secondary comparison value. So we've got to go and tidy this up. So let's start by looking at the column headers and making sure that they are named properly. So we're going to go into, first of all, category 1. Here's it here. And let's scroll down, and there's a label here. So we're going to call this balance scorecard aspect. As of date. Now we don't actually, I don't want to actually leave that as of date on, so I'm going to get rid of that as of date. Okay, we know it's the latest value. Metric name, I think I'm going to change that to be KPI name, because that's what we've referred to it in all the other places. KPI name. Current value, I'm kind of fine with that, that's okay. KPI status, I'm okay with that as well. Comparison value, now I know that probably is actually better wording than target, but I'm going to actually use target. So let's go and look at comparison value. I'm going to change that to target, well let's call it target threshold. Okay, because we're not aiming for that target, it's like a threshold. Secondary value, so we're going to change that secondary value. Okay, and then sparkline, I'm going to call that trend. Okay, so we've got a trend, we've got the absolute difference, we've got the target threshold, we've got the, okay. So in terms of the order of these columns, I'm going to actually move this KPI status to be the first value here. Okay, so I'm going to change the order status, or the order of these columns, and I've always found that moving it from right to left seems to work better than changing it from left to right. So what we're going to do is go into KPI status, KPI indicator value, I think that's called. We can see that's number 4, so let's change that to number 3. There we go, we've moved it there. So we've got the status, we've got the current value, we've got the threshold value, and we've got the absolute difference. So I think that just makes it read a little bit better. The current value, we can see straight away for this one, we're below by 156%. The current value is the current value for this is 770. The threshold is 300. The difference is 470, and here's the trend. Are we getting better or worse? Okay, so that to me is a bit better in terms of the layout of the columns. So let's do a little bit more configuration here, because we don't, if possible, I'd like to get away from using this scroll bar here. So let's start off with the title, and I can probably just call this maintenance scorecard, and I'm going to make it 12, make it a little bit smaller. It's got it up here anyway, but we'll leave that in for just now. We can just make this a little bit smaller here in terms of the background, the header, and I'm going to make it this color here to be the same as the color above, so that's fine. What else are we going to format here? I'm going to change each one of these to make them a little bit smaller. Okay, so it's looking a little bit neater. Subtotal. Now this category subtotal, what we want to do is we don't want these subtotals here because they don't make sense. Okay, you can't add these all together. So let's expand this, and we're going to switch off this category subtotal. So now when these are blank, okay, there's nothing here. 4 items are hidden, so you can extend it, so that's fine. As of date is switched off, current value switched on, the metric name is on. What I do want to do is I want to bold this current value here. So let's look at current value, and I'm going to switch on the bold. Okay, just makes it stand out a little bit. And I'm also going to center this. Okay, and I'm going to do the same for these two here. Okay, so it's starting to come together now, and we're going to make the table a little bit softer with the actual grids. So let's minimize this, and let's go for vertical grids. I'm going to leave it on, but I'm going to make the thickness just 1 rather than 2. Okay, and that's softened it up a little bit as well at the bottom there. Okay, now finally, well not finally, there's plenty of other things we're going to do, but also in terms of like color, I actually think that a little bit of background on this this sparkline is going to make a bit of a difference. So let's go into the sparklines, and let's go and change the actual color there to be a grey color. I want it to be a little bit more subtle, and we're going to go and let's make this 1.5, and I do want to show the comparison value on here, which is the target, because I think that's going to give us an indication over time of if we're below or above the target. But I'm going to change it to be the same as the line, but I'm going to change it to have a dotted line. Okay, so it's very subtle, you can just about see it, but it's there for you to see, so that it's you can kind of see if you're above or below the target most of the time. Okay, might even be, I think if you choose a darker colour, oh, that's not so bad. Okay, so we could use a slightly darker colour. Now there is another option here that I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but it is, if you go up here, which is current uses KPI colors, and essentially what it's going to do is it's going to color this chart, or the line here that refers to the week, based on whether it was above or below the actual KPI. Okay, so it may be something that's useful. I think if you were to do it, would probably use slightly less garish colours here. It's the red and the green. The red and the green's okay because it doesn't take up a lot of. It stands out quite well here, but this is starting to get a little bit too much. So it's an option that you could use, but let's switch it off for just now. Okay, so the background color is what I want to do here. So let's scroll out down to here, and I'm going to use this one of these colors up here. Okay, I just think it just makes it a little bit easier on the eye if it's slightly this kind of cream color here. So we can see we've got our aspects, we've got our actual names, we've got the performance above or below, we've got this value here is bold, we've got a target, we've got the absolute difference. Great. Next, we're going to look at how we can format these as percentages and values and use the appropriate number of decimal places. Okay, so in here we can see that the current value is sometimes a value, okay, which is just an absolute value. Say for example, losses would be 770. Maintenance cost per barrel is going to be a value as well, but it would need a currency. Breakdown cost would need some currency, this would need some currency. In fact, actual versus budget cost is a percentage variance, so that's going to be a percentage. So you can see some of these are currencies, some of these are normal values, others are percentages. So how can we actually go and format these differently depending on the KPI? So let's look at the current value first of all. So we're going to go to the current value section here, and we're going to open that up, and we're going to scroll down, and we can see that there's a format section here. Okay, so that's a code that drives the format of each one of these values here. Now, I'm actually okay with this one here because it's fine to be 2 decimal places. The next one down, maintenance cost per BBL. So in this one, I actually want to prefix it with dollars. Okay, now what's happened here is it's changed everything to dollars. So let's remove that again. So what I forgot to do was scroll up here and select an actual metric here. Okay, so the default is fine for this one here, maintenance cost per BBL. So let's select that one. And let's scroll down. And all we're going to do is we're going to prefix this with dollars. And we can see this one here is changed to dollars, but none of the other ones have. Okay. Maintenance breakdown is going to be dollars, so I could use the same code for this one here. This one here is going to be actual versus budget cost. Okay, so I want that to be a percentage. So let's go and first of all, I can come back and change that other one. Actual versus budget cost. So let's scroll down, and in here I'm going to put a percentage at the end. And we can see it's converted that into percentage, and it's got 2 decimal places. Okay, so I'm going to do the same for each one of these in the current value and in the threshold value, and then we're going to go and have a quick talk about, in fact actually let's talk about the absolute value. So this absolute value is a difference. Okay, so in here I'd like it to be a plus. I mean it's got a 0, it's got a minus beside it, but I'd like it to be a plus here if it's above and a minus if it's below. So let's look at how we can actually force it to have a plus at the start and a minus if it's positive or negative, a plus or a minus. So I'll go and minimize this one, and it's the second comparison value, and I'm going to scroll down here, and I'm going to go into Notepad, and this is one that I used earlier. Now I'll leave a link below to the website that's got all of the different formats for this. Okay, there's a link below, and it's going to take you to the how each of these is formatted in the the codes that can be used, etc. So I'll send that. I don't have enough time to cover that in this video just now, but I will add a link in the description so you can go and you can look at that at your leisure. But for just now, what we're going to do is we're going to force it to be a positive. If it's a positive value, it's going to have a plus at the start. If it's a negative value, it's going to have a negative at the start. And if it's 0, it's just going to be 0. Okay, so now we can see that that's got a positive, and we will need to, I've forgotten to select an individual variance here, but we will also need to use this value here, which is very similar if it's a percentage. Okay, so it's just basically what that does is a semicolon there gives us a positive value, a negative value, and a 0 value, and you've got different layouts depending on the positivity or negativity of the value, I guess. Okay, so that's just a little bit of an insight. It's just a case of going through every single one of these KPIs and for each of these 3 columns, and just selecting the appropriate code and making sure that it looks good. So I'm going to go and do that, and then I'll talk to you once it's done. Okay, so now I have updated all of the formats here, and it looks a lot neater, a lot less extra decimals and zeros, and a bit easier to see the values. So it's now starting to look pretty good. The next thing we're going to look at is going to be this pop-out chart here. Okay, so whenever, just as a standard piece of functionality, whenever you click on either a data point here, or if you click on one of these, this pop-up chart will appear. Okay, and as a default, you've got a date, you've got the name of the KPI, you've got the current value, you've got the difference, and you've got this difference here is probably something I'm going to hide because that's a difference between the absolute value and the current value. And then you've got this value here, which is the same as this value here, which is the percentage difference between the current value and the threshold. Okay, so the second value that was shown here, this value here, is the difference between the threshold and the actual difference here. And it doesn't really make sense to show that value there because this is a difference in its own right. If you get what I'm saying, we're using this as a calculation to show the absolute difference between these 2 values here. So anyway, let's go in and look at formatting the pop-out chart. So I'm going to go up here, I'm going to tidy this up a little bit, and if we go to the bottom here, we can see there are loads of options here for formatting this pop-out chart. So let's just work through them. General, so size 80%, I'm actually going to make it a little bit smaller. I think we're going to, yeah, it's a little bit less intrusive. It's still quite big. We could even make it 60, say 63. That's a bit better. Okay, it doesn't need to be so big. The chart layout, so we can put this auto on. If this auto is not on, then you can choose to have the values at the bottom. Doesn't seem to be working. Hold on. Yeah, here we go. The bottom, the left, the right. I quite like them along the top here. Probably just leave it auto on. So that's fine. Chart subtitle. So if I open this up, that is this here, losses due to equipment failure. So it's sitting at 8 points and it's grey. That's fine. No issues there. KPI chart indicator. So that's there as 12. And it's the actual diamond, if you can see that increasing and decreasing. So we'll just leave that at 12, that's fine. A lot of this looks pretty good. You can match the background colour, which I think is horrible, so I wouldn't leave that, I wouldn't put that on. The indicator value here is fine. Okay, I'll just leave that as it is. I think it's good to have it bold. Apart from that, there's not too much other, there's quite a few other formatting options, but definitely leave the match KPI indicator color on so we can see that getting displayed here, the same as this one here. That's off the secondary indicator, so we don't want that on. This other secondary indicator, I'm going to take that off, okay, because it automatically calculates the difference between the current value and the threshold value, so it doesn't make any sense to show that. The secondary value, we'll leave that off as well. I think you only get that option. Yeah, we'll just switch that one off as well. Let's make this a little bit bigger. I can hide these just to get a bit of space here. The actual label, we want to leave that on, so I don't want to change any of that information there. In fact, actually, I might make this label here a little bit smaller. Not that one. That's not the actual value, it's the actual label. 9. Let's make it 8. The date value. Okay, so I am going to change that because if you're in America or you use it in a month first in the day then the year, that's fine, just leave it. I'm going to change it to the day, then the month. Okay, I'm just going to leave it, change it to that format there, and I am going to make it a bit smaller as well. There we go, that's fine. And then there's a date label. We'll make it a little bit smaller, make each one of these 8. Now this is actually a KPI indicator label that I am going to switch on, and you don't see any text there until you KPI indicator. Just leave that, or KPI status. I'll leave it the same as it is in this value here, so there's a bit of consistency, and we will make that 8. Okay, just in case you want to be able to print this out, take a screenshot of it. Where were we? KPI, date value, date label, pop-out chart date labels. Don't want them on. I think it's fine just to get a bit of a trend there. The legend is at the bottom. Losses due to equipment. The target. Yep, I think that's fine. Difference from KPI absolute value. Now, can you switch that off? It would be good if you could. It doesn't look like you're going to be able to switch it off, which is a bit annoying. Secondary value indicator. Hold on. No, you can't switch it off. Okay, well that's fair enough. You can play about with the X and Y axis here. So this would be this is going to be useful if you want to just change these labels here. But I think I'm just going to leave everything as it is. The Y-axis is the same. Reference lines, you can put these grid lines along and up and down. In fact, actually, I don't mind these here. I think that's quite good. I'll leave those on. The pop-out chart tooltip label. So that is this label here. Now the only thing here is the date here. Again, is in a month, day, year. So if I open this up, I'm going to go and change that to day, month, and then year. So if I hover above here, now we can see it's 20, 27.4, etc., etc. Pop-out chart tooltip KPI indicator value. So I'm going to leave all of these on, they're fine. And then there is an option to, yeah, everything here is pretty much fine. Okay, and you can play about with these and mess about with them, but I think that looks pretty good. The only thing that's not so good is this difference from KPI in absolute terms. It kind of looks as if it's just a shadow being drawn onto the actual value itself, which is unfortunate, but anyway, that's what it is. Okay, so I think we've got ourselves a reasonably good setup here we've got a KPI matrix using the KPI Power Matrix that looks uses a balanced scorecard to come up with the aspects and the actual KPIs themselves. We've set up a KPI indicator and added some conditional formatting to that. And if you did want to change it, then you can obviously just go in and change it. I quite like it when there's no green, it's just the red. But we'll leave it like that for just now. I've coloured this I've made this current value bold. We've went and changed each of the different formats of each of the different KPIs. So if it's whole numbers or pounds, currencies or whatever, percentages, then that's going to be reflected here. For the absolute difference, we've added in a comparison value that shows the absolute difference between the current value and the target, and added a plus or a minus, because I think if you've got an absolute difference, it is quite useful to be able to prefix it with a plus and a minus to say is it above or below. We've added in the sparkline here and put a bit of a colour background just to soften it and make it a bit easier to read. And we've messed about with some of the configured the pop out and some of the values in the pop out and how it looks and feels. So hopefully you found something here that you can use. Hopefully you can you've learned something about transforming the data, setting up the KPI matrix, selecting the KPIs that might be appropriate for a maintenance department. And if you found this video useful, or the whole series of videos useful, there's a couple of videos here, at least there could be 2 or 3, then please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to keep up to date with the latest videos, I tend to release one every week, then hit the subscribe button and you'll be notified whenever I release a new video. Thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you in the next video.